I died on my wedding night, alone in a pool of my own blood, at the peak of my power, without a single enemy strong enough to bring me down. And to this day, no one knows exactly what happened. If that does not tell you everything about my life, then listen closely, because my story is not what they taught you. I am Attila, king of the Huns, ruler of the greatest empire the world had seen since Rome itself was young. The man 2 empires paid in gold just to keep me away from their walls. The man the Christians called the Scourge of God. And this is my story, not the barbarian legend they invented to explain their own fear, but the truth of who I was, what I built, and why the world was never the same after I left it. I was born around the year 406 after Christ, on the vast steppes of Central Asia, in a world of horses, wind, and war. The Huns were not the savages that Roman writers described with such theatrical horror. We were nomadic warriors of extraordinary discipline and skill, forged by centuries of survival in one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. We did not build stone cities because we did not need them. Our empire moved with us. Our strength was speed, precision, adaptability, and an absolute refusal to fight by anyone else's rules. While Roman armies marched in rigid formations along paved roads, we appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating force, and vanished before the enemy could respond. That was not barbarism. That was genius. My father was Munzuk, brother of the great Hun kings Oktar and Ruga, the men who first united the scattered Hun tribes into a single force capable of threatening Rome. I was born into power, but power among the Huns was never simply inherited. It was earned, proven, and defended every single day. From the moment I could ride, which among my people was almost before I could walk, I was trained not just as a warrior, but as a leader of warriors. I learned to read men the way a hunter reads tracks in mud. I learned that the greatest weapon a ruler can carry is not a sword, but the absolute certainty in his eyes that makes others doubt themselves before the first blow is even struck. My uncles understood force. I understood something deeper. I understood fear, and how to make it work for me before I ever needed to unsheathe a blade. But before I became the man who made emperors tremble, I was something that almost no one remembers when they think of me. A child hostage living in the heart of the Roman Empire. This is the part of my story that changes everything once you truly understand it, because it explains not just how I defeated Rome, but why I understood Rome in ways that no enemy before me ever had. When I was still young, I was sent to Ravenna, the western capital of Rome at that time, as part of a diplomatic exchange between the Huns and the Empire. The Romans took Hun children of noble blood as hostages to ensure their treaties were honored, and in exchange, they sent Roman children of similar standing to live among us. The Roman boy who came to live with my people was a young man named Aetius. He learned our ways, our language, our tactics, and our thinking. Years later, he would become the greatest Roman general of his age, and the only man who ever came close to stopping me on the battlefield. We knew each other as boys. We understood each other as enemies. That is a bond, stranger and deeper than most people can imagine. I spent years inside the empire I would one day bring to its knees. I walked their marble streets and listened to their senators argue about politics, while their empire quietly rotted from within. I watched their generals plan campaigns with all the confidence of men who believed that civilization was something Rome had invented, and everyone else was simply waiting to receive. I learned their language with complete fluency. I studied their military tactics, their supply systems, their political divisions, and above all, their arrogance. The Romans looked at me and saw a barbarian boy they had successfully tamed. What they could not see was a future king, absorbing every weakness, every fracture, every blind spot in the greatest empire the Western world had ever built. That time in Rome did not make me love the empire. It made me understand it with a precision that would one day prove fatal to everything they believed was permanent. I returned to my people, sharpened. When my uncle Ruga died in the year 434, leadership of the Huns passed to my brother Bleda and to me. We ruled together, and under our joint leadership, the empire expanded dramatically in every direction. But our most significant achievement in those early years was not military, it was financial. We forced the Eastern Roman Empire, the Empire of Constantinople, to sign the Treaty of Margus, which required them to pay us an annual tribute of gold, to return all Hun refugees who had fled to Roman territory, and to treat us as equals in all diplomatic dealings. The most powerful Christian empire in the world, with its legendary walls and its vast professional armies, signing a treaty that acknowledged the King of the Huns as an equal power. That was not just a military achievement. That was a transformation of the entire order of the known world. Constantinople tried to break the treaty when they believed we were distracted. They sheltered Hun refugees we had demanded returned, and they stopped paying the tribute. That decision cost them enormously. I launched a campaign across the Danube that tore through the Balkans with a ferocity that Roman chroniclers struggled to describe. City after city fell. Naissus, the birthplace of the Emperor Constantine himself, the man who had made Rome Christian, was destroyed so completely that years later, Roman travelers passing through reported that the riverbanks were still littered with the bones of the dead. Serdica fell. Philippopolis fell. I drove my forces to within a day's march of Constantinople itself. The legendary walls held, as I knew they would. I had no intention of wasting my forces in a siege of those walls. I did not need to take their city. I needed to make their emperor understand that everything outside those walls existed only because I permitted it to exist. Constantinople agreed to triple the annual tribute they paid me. The lesson had been received. In the year 445, my brother Bleda died. The circumstances recorded by history are deliberately vague, and I will leave them that way. What matters is that from that moment forward, there was one ruler of the Hun Empire, one voice, one will, one vision. And that vision was about to turn westward. What would you have done in my place? The Eastern Empire had been brought to heel. The Western Empire was visibly weakening, torn apart by political corruption, military failures, and the endless pressure of peoples displaced by my own campaigns pressing against its borders. The greatest military force the world had assembled since the armies of Alexander the Great was at my command. Every road in the known world either led toward opportunity or away from fear of me. Would you have rested? Or would you have done what every calculation of power told you was the only logical next step? I chose to move west, and the reason I chose that moment was a letter. In the year 450, a message arrived from an unexpected source. Honoria, the sister of the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III. She had been imprisoned by her brother after a political scandal that had humiliated the imperial family. And in her desperation, she sent me her personal ring, along with a message asking for my intervention. Some historians debate what exactly she intended. I chose to interpret it as an offer of marriage. and if Honoria was to be my bride, then half of the Western Roman Empire was her rightful dowry. I sent ambassadors to Valentinian, demanding both. Valentinian refused with the contempt of a man who had not yet understood what was coming. His refusal gave me everything I needed. I assembled the largest army I had ever led and crossed into Gaul, the territory that is modern-day France, in the year 451. Ancient sources describe my forces in numbers that historians still debate, but the effect on the populations ahead of my advance is not in dispute. Entire cities emptied before my armies arrived. The panic that moved ahead of my forces was itself a weapon as powerful as any cavalry charge. The name Attila had long since ceased to be simply a name. It had become a force of nature in the minds of the people of the Western world, something between a punishment from God and the end of everything familiar. City after city burned. Metz was destroyed on the eve of Easter, a detail that the Christian chroniclers recorded with particular horror. Reims, Conqueror, Arras, Cambrai, all fell in sequence as my forces swept across Gaul with a speed that the Roman military machine could not match.
And then came the moment that has defined my legacy in Europe for 15 centuries. At the Catalonian plains, the Roman general Aetius, my childhood companion turned lifelong adversary, achieved something no one else had managed. He assembled a coalition. Romans, Visigoths, Burgundians, Alans, and other peoples who under normal circumstances could barely agree on the time of day, united under a single command against a single enemy, against me. The battle that followed was one of the most catastrophic single days of combat in the ancient world. Both sides suffered losses on a scale that left the fields covered in the dead for miles in every direction. The Visigoth king Theodoric was killed in the fighting. I withdrew at nightfall, consolidating my forces behind a defensive perimeter of wagons. Aetius, remarkably, did not press the pursuit. Some historians believe he deliberately allowed me to withdraw, calculating that a living Attila was more useful to Rome's political balance than a power vacuum in the heart of Europe. Whatever his reasoning, I withdrew from Gaul in good order, my forces still formidable, my resolve completely unbroken. The following year, I came back, not to Gaul this time, but to Italy itself. I crossed the Alps and descended into the Po Valley with a force that the Western Empire had no coherent answer to. Aquileia, one of the most important and prosperous cities in northern Italy, resisted. I destroyed it so completely that it essentially ceased to exist as a city. The refugees who fled south from Aquileia settled in the shallow lagoons of the Adriatic coast. Those settlements would eventually become Venice. I did not know that I was founding one of the most beautiful cities in human history by destroying one of the greatest. That is one of history's more extraordinary ironies. Milan fell, Pavia fell, Padua fell. The road to Rome lay completely open before me, and then I stopped. Why did I stop? This question has occupied historians, theologians, and storytellers for 1,500 years. Pope Leo I came to meet me in person at the river Mincio, accompanied by a delegation of Roman senators. The Church later declared that it was divine intervention, that the words of the Holy Father, supported by the visible presence of Saints Peter and Paul standing behind him with drawn swords, turned me back from the gates of Rome. My enemies always needed miracles to explain what they could not understand about me. The reality was a combination of factors that any competent military strategist would recognize immediately. My army was being devastated by disease, almost certainly a plague outbreak that was killing more of my men than any Roman army had managed. My supply lines stretched impossibly thin across the Alps. The Eastern Roman Emperor Marcian had used my absence to launch military strikes across the Danube into Hun territory, threatening my homeland directly, and Aetius was maneuvering to cut off my retreat through the Alpine passes. I had demonstrated beyond any possible doubt that no force in the Western world could stop me in open battle. I had burned half of Italy to make my point. I withdrew to my territories north of the Danube to consolidate, resupply, and plan the next campaign. Rome would have its turn. It simply would not be that year. I never got to Rome. What came next instead was a wedding. In the year 453, I took a new wife, a young woman named Ildiko. I had many wives, as was the custom among my people, and my court was a place where the languages and customs of a dozen different peoples mingled around a single fire. The Roman diplomat Priscus, who visited my court and left behind the most detailed first-hand account of my life that history has preserved, described a scene of remarkable sophistication. He wrote about ambassadors from across the known world gathered in my hall. He described me eating from a simple wooden plate while my guests dined from silver, a deliberate and conscious choice that said everything about where I came from and what I valued. He described a man who listened carefully before he spoke, who commanded absolute loyalty without resorting to cruelty for its own sake, and whose presence in a room was something that changed the texture of the air itself. That was not the monster of Roman propaganda. That was a king. The celebrations for my wedding to Ildiko were enormous, as everything in my life had always been enormous. I ate and drank through an entire night with the uncomplicated joy of a man standing at the absolute summit of everything he had ever built. The greatest empire of the age, the fear and respect of every power in the known world. A lifetime of victories behind me and more planned ahead. And then I retired to my wedding chamber with my new bride. I never emerged. The following morning, when my attendants grew alarmed by the silence, they broke down the door. They found Ildiko huddled in a corner, trembling and weeping, unable to speak. And they found me dead on the bed, lying in an enormous pool of blood. There were no wounds anywhere on my body, no signs of struggle, no indication of any external cause. The blood had come from within, most likely a massive hemorrhage, a blood vessel that ruptured during the night, possibly aggravated by the excessive drinking of the celebration. The man who had made 2 empires pay tribute, who had crossed the Alps with the largest army in the Western world, who had never been defeated in open battle, had been brought down not by any enemy sword, but by his own blood, alone in the dark, on the night he had been celebrating the joy of a new beginning. I wonder what is going through your mind right now. Because I think most people, when they hear how I died, feel something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not relief. Something closer to the strange sadness that comes when you realize that no amount of power, no accumulation of victories, no empire built across the width of a continent can protect a man from the one enemy that waits inside his own body. My people mourned me in the way of our tradition. My greatest warriors cut their own faces with their blades, so that the mightiest of all warriors would be mourned not with the tears of women, but with the blood of men. I was placed in a triple coffin, an outer layer of iron, a middle layer of silver, and an innermost layer of gold. I was buried in a secret location that my people chose with great care. And when the burial was complete, every man who had participated in it was put to death, so that no enemy, no Roman, no rival, no future power could ever find my resting place and use it against the memory of what I had been. To this day, after more than 1,500 years of searching, my tomb has never been found. I entered the earth as I had always intended to move through the world. leaving no trail, giving nothing away, existing on my own terms, even in death. The empire I had built did not survive me. My sons, Elak, Dengizich, and Ernak, fought each other for supremacy with a bitterness that destroyed from within what no external enemy had been able to touch. The subject peoples who had bent their knees to me rose in rebellion the moment they understood I was gone. At the Battle of Nidau, barely 2 years after my death, a coalition of Germanic peoples defeated my sons and shattered the Hun Empire permanently. Within a generation, the Huns had fragmented and dispersed so completely that they essentially vanished from the historical record. Rome celebrated, but Rome's celebration did not last long. The Western Roman Empire, which I had weakened to the point of structural collapse over 2 decades of campaigns, finally fell in 476, barely 23 years after my death. My enemies outlasted me by less than a single generation, and the medieval world that grew from the ruins of Rome, the world of kingdoms and cathedrals and feudal lords that shaped European civilization for the next 1,000 years, was born directly from the chaos and the migrations that my campaigns had set irreversibly in motion. I did not destroy Rome. I simply made it impossible for Rome to pretend any longer that it was eternal. I am Attila, King of the Huns, the Scourge of God. And although Rome thanked its gods when I was gone, the world that remained was already the world Rome could no longer survive. I did not end civilization. I shook it hard enough to show everyone exactly how fragile it had always been. The echo of that shake moved through every century that followed, through every kingdom that rose from the ruins I left behind, all the way through history, all the way to this moment, all the way to you.